There are rulers whose names are spoken in triumph, and there are rulers whose shadows linger long after their empires crumble. Tonight, we walk into the life of a man both feared and adored, a man remembered as the lawgiver, but buried as a weary soul who could never escape the weight of his crown. This is the story of Suleiman the Magnificent, the man who stretched the Ottoman Empire across continents, yet met his end not under golden domes, but in silence, far from the capital he had made eternal. His rise was glorious, his death was haunting, and in between lay a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the kind of sorrow that poisons even the strongest heart. It begins in 1494 in the mist-veiled city of Trabzon, perched along the restless shores of the Black Sea. There, Hafsa Sultan gave birth to a boy destined to wear history's heaviest crown. They named him Suleiman. He was no ordinary child. While other princes played in marble courtyards, Suleiman devoured books. He learned languages, philosophy, law, and the mysteries of the stars. He read of Alexander, who carved the world with his sword, and Solomon, whose name echoed justice and wisdom. From the beginning, the boy bore not only a hunger for knowledge, but a vision larger than the empire he would inherit. By 7 years old, he was sent to Manisa, the crucible of heirs. It was there he learned solitude, the kind of solitude only power can bring. Every whisper carried meaning. Every glance could be treachery. He grew up not simply to rule, but to watch, to measure, and to wait. In 1520, the empire shifted. His father, Selim the Grim, a man so ruthless he had doubled the empire in blood and fire, was dead. The crown passed to Suleiman, a poet prince of 26, refined, cultured, and untested. Europe watched with suspicion. Could this dreamer of verses truly command armies? Could he match the iron hand of his father? Within months, the young sultan answered. He marched against Belgrade, its fortress thought impregnable. When it fell, Europe trembled. In 1522, he broke the Knights of St. John on the island of Rhodes, their crusading stronghold reduced to ashes after a siege that tested the endurance of both sides. The West, once dismissive, now whispered, "This is no ordinary man." But Suleiman's eyes looked farther still. In 1526, he struck Hungary with thunder. At Mohat's, in less than 2 hours, he crushed an entire kingdom. King Louis II drowned fleeing the carnage, and Hungary, proud and Catholic, was left in ruins. Then, in 1529, he stood before the gates of Vienna. The thunder of Ottoman cannons shook the Habsburg capital, mud and frost dragging at the soldiers' boots, storms lashing their tents. Europe held its breath, knowing if those walls fell, Christendom itself might break. But storms broke his momentum. The siege failed, and yet the message was clear. The Ottomans were at Europe's door, and the West would never sleep peacefully again. Yet Suleiman's story is not only of campaigns, it is also of the woman who defied every law of the empire's tradition. Her name was Alexandra, a captured slave from Ruthenia, red-haired and sharp-witted, sold into the palace harem. But she was no concubine to be forgotten. She ensnared the sultan's heart, and he renamed her Hurrem, the cheerful one. More than a lover, she became his wife, his confidant, the one whose counsel he valued above all. For centuries, no Ottoman sultan had taken a legal wife. Suleiman shattered that tradition, and with it came whispers. Enemies called her a sorceress, a foreigner who bewitched the throne. Yet their letters remain, filled with passion, tenderness, and words not of a ruler to a subject, but of a man to the woman who carried his soul. To her, he was not a sultan, but her Solomon. But with love came intrigue, and with intrigue came death. In the shadows of the palace, power shifted. Rustam Pasha, Suleiman's brilliant but calculating vizier, and Hurrem's son-in-law, rose high, his influence unsettling the balance of the court. And there was Mustafa, the prince, the soldier's favorite, brave, just, and beloved by the army. He was everything an heir should be. But Mustafa's very existence threatened Hurrem's children. Rumors twisted through the court like a serpent. Was Mustafa plotting rebellion, or was he merely the victim of whispered lies spun by those who feared him? In 1553, on campaign against the Safavids, Suleiman summoned his son. Mustafa walked into the imperial tent expecting his father's embrace. Instead, he met silence, shadows, and the strangler's cord. The soldiers outside wept openly, unable to believe their beloved prince had been condemned. The empire was stunned. Historians still debate whether Mustafa was guilty or innocent, but one truth remains. From that day on, Suleiman was never the same. The magnificent still to the world, yes, but inside, something within him withered, and the sorrow of that loss clung to him until his dying breath. And as the empire pressed eastward, against Persia, against the endless sands and mountains, the Sultan who once strode across Europe with fire in his eyes began to fade. The Treaty of Amasya brought peace at last, but it was a peace uneasy, fragile, and heavy with mistrust. The glory of conquest gave way to a quieter war, an inward war between grief, age, and the creeping shadow of mortality. But Suleiman was not only a warrior, he was also a builder of eternity. He commanded the great architect Sinan to raise a mosque that would carry his name through the centuries. The Suleymaniye Mosque rose above Istanbul like a prayer in stone, its dome an echo of heaven itself. Sacred soil from Mecca was laid in its foundations, so that the empire's heart beat in unison with Islam's holiest ground. On the day of its completion, Suleiman stood in silence beneath its vast dome and whispered, "I too am mortal, but this shall remain." And yet, even as he sought to carve immortality in stone, the empire he loved was already shifting underfoot. Betrayal lingered in the air. The sea raged with new enemies, and age itself, relentless, merciless, began to drag the great sultan toward a final, painful reckoning. Before we descend into the twilight of his reign, where death waits silently beyond the battlefield, pause with me for a moment. If this story has drawn you in, if you feel the weight of Suleiman's crown pressing as heavily on you as it did on him, consider subscribing. Join us on this journey into history's darkest corners, where power, love, and death collide in ways stranger than fiction. For Suleiman's end is not of glory, but of silence. And as his armies march toward one final siege, the question remains, will the magnificent die as a conqueror or as a broken man, consumed by the very empire he built? The answer waits on the blood-soaked fields of Sigetvar. By 1566, the empire stretched from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, from the coast of Africa to the heart of Persia. And yet, its ruler, Suleiman the Magnificent, was no longer the young conqueror who had once stormed castles and shattered kings. His hair had whitened, his eyes dimmed, his body trembled with age and illness, but his spirit refused to bow. At 71, most men would have sought rest, But not Suleiman. He had one last campaign left in him, one last march to prove that the empire's heart still beat with fire. His destination, the fortress of Sigetvar in Hungary. Sigetvar was no ordinary fortress. It was a symbol, a thorn in the empire's side, a last defiant bastion of Habsburg resistance. To Suleiman, its fall would seal his legacy, and so, though his body groaned with pain, he mounted his horse and set out at the head of one of the largest armies Europe had ever seen. The banners of the empire snapped in the wind. The sound of drums rolled like thunder across the plains, and once again, all of Europe held its breath. The siege dragged on, brutal and unrelenting. The defenders of Sigetvar, though hopelessly outnumbered, fought with a desperation born of doom. Day after day, cannon fire shook the walls, smoke clouded the skies, and blood seeped into the earth. The Sultan remained in his tent, too frail to command from the field, yet still issuing orders, still willing his empire forward. But each night, when the torches flickered low, those closest to him saw the truth. His body was failing. The once magnificent conqueror was now a prisoner of pain. And then, as the final blow to Sigetvar neared, the candles in the imperial tent were quietly extinguished. Suleiman was dead, the greatest sultan of the Ottoman Empire, the man who had ruled for nearly half a century, who had reshaped the map of the known world, had taken his last breath, not in the marble halls of Istanbul, but on a battlefield far from home. Yet his death was hidden. Grand Vizier Sokolu, Mehmed Pasha, fearing the army might falter if they knew their master had fallen, sealed the tent. The news was smothered in silence. Physicians embalmed the body in secret. His organs were buried beneath the soil of Sigetvar, so that a part of him would remain where his empire had triumphed one last time. His soldiers continued to fight, unaware that the man they fought for was already gone. Only when the fortress finally fell, after weeks of fire and blood, was the truth revealed. The Magnificent was no more. The empire did not collapse at once. On the contrary, Suleiman left it larger and richer than ever before. His laws, his justice, his mosques, his palaces, these things endured. To his people, he was still Kanuni, the lawgiver, the ruler who gave structure to chaos. Yet beneath the surface, cracks had already begun to spread. The death of Mustafa had robbed the empire of its brightest air. Court intrigue, factionalism, and whispers of corruption seeped deeper with each passing year. And though Suleiman's successors inherited his throne, they could not inherit his greatness. History remembers him in contradictions. To the west, he was the terror of Europe, the shadow that loomed over Vienna, the conqueror whose armies seemed endless. To his own people, he was the just ruler, the man who brought order and law, who raised monuments that kissed the sky. But to those who knew him most intimately, he was also a man haunted by sorrow, the father who condemned his own son, the husband who listened too closely to whispers in the harem, the old warrior who dragged himself to one final battle he would never live to see completed. And so, the story of Suleiman the Magnificent does not end with a triumphant march, but with a silence heavy as stone, a silence broken only by the weeping of soldiers who discovered their master had left them days before they knew it, a silence that clung to the empire itself, like a reminder that even the greatest rulers are but mortals, consumed in the end by the same shadows they once held at bay. When you walk beneath the soaring dome of the Suleimaniye Mosque today, you can still feel his presence. The air hums with something eternal, as though his whisper lingers in the stones. I too am mortal, but this shall remain. Yet standing there, one cannot help but wonder if the man who built an empire also built his own prison, forever remembered as magnificent, but never free from the sorrows that gnawed at his soul. Suleiman's death at Sigidvar was not merely the end of a sultan, it was the closing of an age. The empire would go on, yes, but never again with the same brilliance, never again with a ruler who embodied both conqueror and poet, lawgiver and dreamer. His passing was not just the death of a man, it was the first toll of a bell that, centuries later, would mark the fall of the Ottoman world itself. The story of Suleiman the Magnificent is a reminder carved in the marrow of history that power, no matter how vast, cannot shield a man from sorrow, betrayal, or death. He conquered kingdoms, but he could not conquer time. He wrote laws for millions, but he could not write an escape from grief. In the end, all that remained was a body hidden in a tent, and an empire left to wonder if its greatest ruler had also planted the seeds of its decline. So the question remains, what do we truly remember of Suleiman, the magnificence or the silence, the glory or the grief? His empire still whispers across continents, but his story whispers something deeper, that behind every crown lies a weight heavy enough to break even the strongest of men. And now, I leave that question to you. What haunts you most about Suleiman's story? The battles he won, the son he lost, or the silence in which he died? Share your thoughts below. For history is not just what we are told, it is what we carry with us long after the last candle has gone dark.